Hello and thank you for watching the Angry Rooster Creations channel. Today we have another fountain pen related video. We are going to be taking a look at this sample file of Noodler's Dostoyevsky fountain pen ink. I hope I did not butcher that name. This is a light blue / turquoise ink from the Noodler's Russian line of inks. The pen that I'm going to be using today is this Jinhao 82 Mini with a hooded extra fine nib. And I'm going to be doing my writing tests on five different papers. It's going to be a 20-pound copy paper, a Pen Gear composition notebook, a Blick white sulfite drawing paper, that's a 50-pound paper, a 50-pound Koh-i-Noor sketch paper, and a 98-pound Canson mixed media paper. Now, I tend to use my fountain pens primarily for art and drawing, and so the papers that I am using today, the art papers that I'm using, while they may not be the kinds of papers that most individuals will use for their fountain pens with, they're the kinds of papers that I tend to use, and therefore they're the papers that I have on hand. And so without further ado, we'll get on to that writing sample with the 20-pound copy paper first. And now our writing sample on the 20-pound copy paper. All right. Now, so far, this ink seems to be behaving quite well. Now, you'll notice a few dry spots. At first, I was having a bit of an issue with this ink flowing a bit at the beginning. I'm not going to blame that on the ink. I did a video with this pen, this little Jinhao 82 here, where I was showing the pen off, and I did a lot of things in that video where I spent talking with the pen uncapped, showing different features of the pen. So the last time I used it, so I probably should have primed that pen or written on a scratch sheet before I started this writing test. I will do that before I start on the next paper, because when I first inked this pen, I was not having those issues. So don't chalk that up to the ink when you see things like that right there, for it being a dry flowing ink. But as far as how it's performing on this page, there's a couple spots where I maybe slowed down, and it looks like the ink at that eye at the end of Mini there, where maybe it kind of grew on the paper a bit, but I don't see really any feathering or spreading on the paper. It's pretty much doing what I would expect it to do out of a extra fine hooded nib. Now, one, this is it's copy paper, it's quite absorbent, and two, I think this is a rather faster drying ink. So as you can see, I did not, the 10-second smear here, I got no smear. I did a scrub and tried to immediately wipe it, got no smear. I think it's a combination of this ink drying fast and this being on an absorbent paper. Now I'm going to flip it over to the back, and we have some ghosting. It's not terrible though. There's a possibility with this nib you could possibly get use from both sides of the paper. I would probably still advise with this particular ink and this particular pen that if you were going to have to use this ink on copy paper, it would be preferable that you only use the front side, because there is some ghosting here, but it's not the worst ghosting I've ever seen, and there's no full bleeds even with that scrub. So I think you could probably get away with using the back side of this paper here, but you know, this also isn't the best as far as ghosting and bleed on copy paper that I've seen, but it's far from the worst. So, you know, preferably I would only use this on a copy paper if I knew I wasn't going to have to use the back of the page. But if you were pressed in a situation and had to use both sides of a piece of copy paper, I think you could make it work. That does it for the copy paper. Our next paper is going to be the Pen Gear Composition Notebook. And now here we are with the Pen Gear Composition Notebook. Alright, that concludes the drawing, or the writing test, excuse me, and the composition notebook. Now, from what I can see here, it looks like there might have been a little bit of feathering on this paper and some spreading slightly. Actually, honestly, this is strange. Usually I found most inks perform worse on the copy paper and better in this composition notebook. But here I'm actually thinking it performed worse on this notebook paper than it does on the copy paper, which is kind of surprising to me. Usually the copy paper is the worst, but here it looks like it may have wanted to spread a bit and kind of grow on the page. But another thing, it's probably not going to come up too well on the camera, but the color kind of looks darker on this paper, and it doesn't really look that good. The hue has changed, which is kind of, well, I have had some other inks that I've wrote on this, and for some reason the inks suddenly look much less impressive on this paper. Most of them that usually handle this paper better look fine, but on this one, yeah, it got darker, and it just, yeah, it doesn't look that great here, which is kind of odd to me. Now, as far as on the back of the page, we do have, in the scrub, we have some ghosting. Not a full bleed, but there's some ghosting there. Maybe a little bit of ghosting through the writing, not terrible. Now, down here, you'll see that E, I kind of messed that one up, and I went back over it, so I doubled some of the lines. That's an E for the EF on the print there, and that's ghosting pretty hard. It's not like a full bleed, but it's the worst case. That's because I doubled over a line that was already there. I think if you had a wetter flowing pen, you might see some more severe ghosting. If you had, especially if you had like a really wet medium or a broad possibly, you might see a bleed, maybe. But with this extra fine here, I think you could get away with using both sides of the paper, so long as you don't dump a lot of ink with some kind of scrubbing or scribbling, or double over lines on a mistake like I did, and put, you know, excessive amounts of ink in one spot. I think you could get away with using both sides of the paper. So, not terrible, but like I said, the color on this paper, it's not doing this ink justice. So, that's it for the notebook. We are now going to move on to the 50-pound Blick white sulfite drawing paper. And now here we are with the 50-pound Blick white sulfite drawing paper. Alright, that's got us taken care of on the Blick paper here. So, once again, looks like it handled this paper just fine. Now, out of the drawing papers, this is the most absorbent of the drawing papers, so some of the inks that I've tested have showed some tendency, even on this paper, to want to feather and grow, but this one here, it hasn't been bad so far, and definitely on this paper is not bad at all. It looks like it is the extra fine that nib is supposed to produce, so it's not growing. It does not appear to be feathering from the top side of the paper. The actual side you'll be looking at when reading and writing, It looks perfectly fine. Now, I can say that on this paper now, I am seeing some hints of shading that are there. There's definitely some shading there. There's definitely some shading in the KY, the E on Dostoyevsky on the bottom here. Misspelled it on the top. Some shading in the J on Jinhao there. It's not the most shading, but this is an extra fine hooded nib. So, it's not going to put down the most ink, and therefore you're not going to see the most possible shading. With a broader nib, or especially maybe if you had something like a stub, you would probably see some pretty good shading with this ink. But, you know, for it to actually show some with this really, you know, this little EF hooded nib. Now on the smear test, still seems to be drying quite fast. We have some smear starting at the third mark here, so that would be about 7 seconds, but there's actually a few lines here that did not smear, so it must be that when I made those strokes, these two got a little extra ink out of the nib. But the majority of these lines, even on the last lines here that smeared, were already dry on the paper. It's just towards the end of the stroke where there was a little blot of ink left over. So at a maximum, it looks like 7 seconds to dry on this paper. And then you can see I did get the scrub to smear. Not the biggest smear, so it still had already seemingly dried in pretty quick. And then on the back, man, there's really nothing. I mean, here, I don't know if anything's going to show on the camera. You can maybe see a little bit of where the scrub is, and it's not really a ghost or a bleed. This is, after all, a 50-pound paper. And that being said, this being an art paper, usually when you're doing a drawing on an art paper, you don't use both sides of the paper. You draw on one side, and then that art piece would be displayed. And so maybe you sign the back or something like that, but generally speaking, you don't use the back of a sheet of art paper. And most of the time, you would sign the front, so it would be visible when somebody's looking at the art piece to see who the artist was. So, having that been said, does pretty good on this paper, and that's it for this one. Next is going to be the 50-pound Koh-i-Noor sketch paper. And now here we are with the 50-pound Koh-i-Noor sketch paper. Alright, that's got our writing done here with the 50-pound Koh-i-Noor sketch paper. Now, this is not a very absorbent paper whatsoever. In fact, I would go as far as say this is a non-absorbent paper, because this is one of the papers that almost every ink that I've tried on it has performed very well. And as we can see here, there is no feathering, there's no spreading or growing on the page. I am getting some shading here. Once again, not extreme, but you got to remember I'm using a extra fine hooded nib, so that needs to be taken into account. But there definitely is some shading going on that is pretty apparent. As you can see, it was still wet after 10 seconds. Even that first line smeared on the 10-second smear, but this is, like I said, is not an absorbent paper at all. You can see I did get the scrub to smear a little bit. So I do think that this isn't the wettest flowing pen. I think that I will have to say that. I guess it's not extremely wet flowing. Like I said, it is a hooded extra fine nib, but still, you can see the smears there. As far as the back, there shouldn't be anything. And of course, there isn't, because I don't think I've had any inks to actually bleed through on this paper. This is thin for a 50-pound paper, but like I said, it's not absorbent whatsoever, so inks like aggressively getting into it and bleeding through it has not been a problem in all the inks that I've tested on this particular paper. And yeah, so yeah, it's handling this pretty good. And I will say this, between this and I believe out of all the paper so far, the color of the ink on this paper looks better than the other papers I've tested so far. And all of them have looked far better than it did in that notebook. I still don't understand why exactly the color was kind of dulled down on the notebook paper, but for whatever reason, it was. Alright, and that's got us finished on the Koh-i-Noor. We're on to the last paper, which is the Canson 98-pound mixed media paper. And here now is the Canson 98-pound mixed media paper. Alright, oops. That's got us finished up on the Canson mixed media paper. So, now this mixed media paper is meant to be, like it says, it's a mixed media paper. It's supposed to handle a little bit of everything. Inks, acrylics, some watercolors, alcohol-based inks and markers, dry media, pastels, etc. So, it is not a very absorbent paper, and as such, the ink performed great on this. Every single ink that I have put on this paper has done well. Even the ill-tempered inks that don't want to work on anything and feather and go do crazy stuff, all the ones I have tried, this paper has been fine for every single ink that I have put on it. And this is not an exception. And this one, especially if you get to looking at that E and F here and the E and F there, is exhibiting the most that are there, the most shading out of any of the papers. On the smear test, though, it actually looks like it's dried faster on this paper than the Koh-i-Noor, which is a little bit odd. But it looks like maybe a little bit of a smear at the third line, but most of it started at the fourth line here, so about 6.5 seconds or so to dry. And then the scrub and smear kind of went down a bit dry on the scrub there. But all in all, looks great. Let's say probably that the color is a little better also on this paper. And there's going to be nothing on the back. And it's exactly as I thought, nothing on the back, because this 98-pound paper here is about the thickness and weight of cardstock. And like I said, it is not an absorbent paper whatsoever, so I have yet to have anything bleed through this paper. So I didn't expect to see anything on the back there. And that's going to conclude our writing portions of this test. And real quick, I want to share this poor man's chromatography that I did. This is, unfortunately, a section of paper towel because I didn't have any filter paper on hand. So I made do with what I had. And what I had was this. This had a line of ink put down, was put into a mixture of 70% isopropyl alcohol and water, mixed at a roughly 30% alcohol solution. And the strip was dipped into that immediately after putting down the line of ink. Now you can kind of see here that actually this line of ink wasn't the most permanent on being when it was immediately put into the water, which is a little strange because I think if I understand correctly, this is considered a bulletproof ink. Of course, we'll be doing a short water test here in a minute to determine that, but it looks like the majority of this ink moved up the page because it's very faint at the bottom here, and most of that ink made it well up the page. And the most of that color, the dyes and such, are up and around here, quite far up the paper. And so what we've got is a distinct light blue here that is the same kind of as these sort of faint ghost lines there. They're kind of that light blue color, more closer to that light blue color. And then right here underneath it, there's a band of the very much turquoise coloring. So it seems that there's at least 2 separate color dyes here. A lighter, more sky blue color and a very turquoisey color. So, you know, if this was on better filter paper, you might be able to see more, but from what I can see, it looks like there might be, like I said, at least 2 distinct different dyes in this ink. And that could be where the shading is coming in. But like I said, not necessarily the best paper to do this on, so I wouldn't call this the definitive, the definitive chromatography by a long shot. But for what it's worth, there it is. And now we're going to do a quick water test. Alright, now I'm going to do a quick water test. I have a little slip of 20-pound copy paper. I'm going to draw a little grid on here and allow that grid to dry for 30 seconds. Then I'm going to take this little pipette. I'm going to drip water on this piece of paper. I'm going to let that sit for a further 10 seconds with the water on it. Then I will rub the water around on the paper and dab up the excess with this tissue. And we're going to see if any ink lifts onto the tissue and if any ink runs on the page. And there, it looks like, I don't know what's going to show up. It looks like there's a little bit of a turquoise hue, almost a lighter color hue. Maybe it got lifted. It's kind of hard to tell. If it is there, I feel like there's some there. It's very faint. So it looks like a little bit of the ink might have moved, or, you know, been lifted onto the I don't know, maybe, is it really? I'm having a hard time telling if I can even see. It might just be my eyes playing tricks on me, because I want to say there's a little bit of blue there, but I can't really tell. As far as the ink on the page, it is pretty well saturated. In fact, the fibers of the paper are starting to peel up, so I couldn't really do much more rubbing or anything, or I would start to actually, the paper would start to fall apart. And even if some of it did move, I feel like maybe at the ends of these dots you can kind of see, it looks like maybe some ink started to sort of bleed around the ends of these dots. I don't know how well it's going to show, but for the most part, where the lines are, they stayed. So it appears this is a fairly water resistant ink. Now, I've seen some other people that did some tests with this ink. I know Adam, an ink guy, had his resistance test. I've watched his video on this ink, and he lets his smears dry for 3 days before water testing them, and I believe this is an ink that pretty much didn't move for anything. And on some of these Noodler's inks, they're not necessarily immediately waterproof. Most of the time, to get the best waterproof performance, it needs to dry, usually for at least a few hours. But from what I can see, 30 seconds drip and rub it in, it is a fairly water-resistant ink. If you were writing with this and then you accidentally spilled some water on what you were writing, it's not going to disappear off the paper. And maybe if you've got a spot where there's an extremely wet blob, where possibly the ink hasn't fully bonded with the paper, you might get a little bit of a bleed. But from what I can see, for the most part, once it's there, it's pretty much there in terms of water. And so, my final thoughts on this ink. It seems like, now I didn't have the greatest selection of paper, but it seems like the hue of this ink is going to be a little bit dependent on the paper that you write it on, because it certainly did look better on some papers, and like I said, on that notebook, it just got kind of dark and kind of dull. It was not impressive looking at all on that notebook paper, but it seems to behave quite well, even on the copy paper. Maybe ghosts a little bit. So it seems to be pretty tolerant of more absorbent papers, and on the non-absorbent papers it worked just fine. On the non-absorbent papers it also had some shading, and I think that if you had a broader nib you would probably see even more of that. It's just that, you know, I had an extra fine hooded nib, so definitely not the best nib to show off any shading properties. But now that I've done all those tests, I am going to do, there is one more test that will be coming. It's not going to be in this video. I am taking the sheets that I wrote on with all the various inks that are on here, and I'm going to be doing a longer running light test where I'm going to take this Canson mixed media, the Koh-i-Noor, and the Blick papers, and I'm going to tape them to the glass on a window on the south side of my house facing outward and leave them taped in that window for 1 month. I have already done one light fastness test with some other inks previously on this channel, and I'm going to do the same with these inks here. So that is a video you can look forward to in the future of seeing the light fastness test and seeing how these inks handle. Like I said, this ink I believe is listed as an eternal ink, and so far the Noodler's inks I tested in the past that were labeled as eternal inks did not fade. So I think this one has a very good shot at not fading, but we shall see. Like I said, that is a test for a different video that you can look forward to in the future. But with having said all of that, if you watch the video to this point, to the end of this video, I thank you for sticking around and watching the entire video. Yeah, that's really great. If you don't mind, go down there and hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed it or thought it was informative and got something out of it. That would really help me out. If you've got any questions about it, or you got any questions about anything that you saw in the video, or maybe you have some comments or some criticisms, critiques about the way that I did things in my tests in my video, hey, drop them down there in the comment section. I try to read all of my comments, at least especially right now. I don't get all that many. So I will read your comment, and I probably will get to reply to you. And if you've watched this video, maybe you've watched some other videos, you like the way that I try to present the information in my videos, you think I do a decent job, I would also appreciate a subscription. That would also help me out and, let you see what other things I have coming in the future. With that having all been said, I thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye.